But it was intriguing to note how people, there was the word they kept using here, pivoted. So they pivoted using either the strengths of what they did before to...
Inside palace walls, an absolute war has just exploded, and staff say the fury is unlike anything witnessed in a generation. Princess Anne has just executed a hidden, top-secret directive from Queen Elizabeth II, seizing total personal control over an unmapped royal estate.
Wherever you are, thank you for being here today with your fiancé, Gareth. We're so pleased that you came.
This brutal, icy maneuver has completely blindsided Queen Camilla and left her son, Tom Parker Bowles, utterly humiliated and in an absolute fury. Tom spent over a year planning a multi-million-pound luxury takeover of the land, only to be completely crushed by Anne's ruthless legal veto. The British royal family has spent generations navigating the complex boundaries between public duty, historic tradition, and private wealth. While the public is well acquainted with crown assets like Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, a parallel network of entirely private holdings has quietly existed behind the scenes. Recently, a significant shift in the management of these private assets has sparked intense discussions within the palace walls. According to multiple reports from royal correspondents and legal analysts close to the estate management team, Princess Anne has formally taken absolute control over a previously unmapped portion of the late Queen Elizabeth II's private estate. This administrative maneuver has reportedly created deep friction within the extended royal family, specifically drawing a sharp reaction from Queen Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles, who had spent considerable time developing alternative plans for the land. To understand how Princess Anne secured this absolute authority, it is necessary to examine the specific legal architecture that governs the late Queen's private will. Unlike the Crown Estate, which is managed by an independent board and pours its revenue directly into the government treasury in exchange for the sovereign grant, the private estate of the monarch is entirely personal property. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, she left behind a series of highly confidential codicils and private trusts that were deliberately kept separate from standard institutional succession. Royal legal experts note that the late Queen was deeply focused on ensuring that her personal sanctuaries remained untouched by modern commercial trends or public controversies. In late 2021, fearing that future generational shifts might leave these lands vulnerable to outside financial exploitation, she signed a sovereign directive that designated her daughter, Princess Anne, as the sole custodian and executor of these specific private files and hidden borders. This particular mandate was designed as a protective legal trigger. It granted Princess Anne lifelong trusteeship and absolute veto power over a sprawling, off-the-books reserve that directly borders the Gatcombe Park estate in Gloucestershire, often referred to by palace staff as the Gatcombe Borderlands. This territory has been quietly managed and expanded by the family since the 1970s, completely insulated from parliamentary scrutiny, public land registries, and royal funding debates. The legal mechanism dictates that if any party, inside or outside the immediate family, attempts to reclassify or introduce large-scale commercial activity to these private boundaries, the administrative control immediately defaults to Princess Anne. For decades, the existence of the Gatcombe Borderlands was kept within a tiny circle of senior courtiers and legal advisors. The land contains historic structures, ancient woodlands, and agricultural tracts that were deliberately left out of any public marketing materials or regional development plans. Sources within the royal household's financial department indicate that the late Queen chose Princess Anne for this specific role because of her long-standing reputation for financial discipline and her firm stance against the modernization of private royal assets. While other members of the family have occasionally embraced commercial partnerships or media ventures, Princess Anne has consistently maintained a traditional approach to estate management, prioritizing conservation and local agricultural stability over corporate revenue. The sudden activation of this sovereign directive came as a massive surprise to Queen Camilla's side of the family. According to documents reviewed by independent royal biographers, Tom Parker Bowles and his legal representatives had spent the better part of 14 months working under the assumption that these private tracts would eventually be opened up for lease or cooperative management under the wider umbrella of the Duchy of Lancaster or General Estate Updates. Because King Charles has traditionally favored a more modernized and streamlined approach to the royal footprint, Camilla's family believed there was a clear pathway to integrating these historic lands into a broader cultural and culinary initiative. When the sealed documents were officially opened and registered in early 2026, the reality of the late Queen's legal strategy became undeniable. Princess Anne did not merely inherit a management role, she was handed an absolute legal fortress that completely cuts off any external influence. Reports from staff inside Clarence House indicate that the revelation caused immediate tension, with some describing the atmosphere as incredibly strained. The frustration stems from the fact that extensive time, money, and logistical planning had already been invested by outside parties into mapping out the future of the Gatcombe borderlands, all based on the belief that the land would be accessible through standard bureaucratic channels. The primary conflict lies in a fundamental disagreement over what constitutes proper stewardship of royal heritage in the modern era. On one hand, the commercial faction argues that utilizing historic private lands for premium agricultural brands, high-end hospitality, and public engagement helps fund the preservation of these aging structures without relying on public money. From this perspective, leaving hundreds of acres of prime land completely insulated from the modern economy is an outdated practice that misses massive opportunities for cultural branding. On the other hand, Princess Anne's administrative philosophy strictly mirrors that of her late mother, which dictates that certain elements of the royal legacy must remain entirely non-transactional. For Anne, the moment a historic royal property is transformed into a commercial venue, it loses its essential character and compromises the dignity of the institution. As the news of the transfer settled within the palace, it became clear that Princess Anne had no intention of compromising on the late Queen's original vision. The activation of the sovereign mandate effectively froze all ongoing discussions regarding third-party leases or public-private partnerships for the Gloucestershire Reserve. Legal analysts specializing in constitutional law have pointed out that because this trust was executed under personal sovereign privilege, it is entirely immune to standard challenges from within the family or requests for review from the Privy Council. This leaves those who had alternative plans for the estate with virtually no legal recourse, cementing Princess Anne's position as the ultimate gatekeeper of the family's most private territorial legacy. The fallout from this decision has only just begun to ripple through the various branches of the royal household, setting the stage for a major quiet confrontation over the true purpose of royal wealth and the preservation of history. The friction surrounding the management of the Gatcombe borderlands becomes much clearer when looking closely at the extensive business proposals that had been quietly circulating behind palace doors. For over a year, Tom Parker Bowles, who has established a prominent career as a food writer, critic, and culinary entrepreneur, had been working with a group of commercial advisors to secure a footprint within this specific royal estate. Far from viewing the land as an untouchable historic monument, his team saw it as the ideal location for a highly lucrative venture aimed at the global luxury market. The project, which was given the working title of the Sovereign Palette, was designed to blend high-end British agricultural heritage with exclusive members-only hospitality experiences. According to private project briefs shared among luxury hospitality consultants in London, the plans for the estate were incredibly detailed and ambitious. The centerpiece of the proposal involved the complete restoration and conversion of the estate's historic 16th-century tithe barns and adjacent outbuildings. Instead of leaving these structures as closed archives or storage spaces, Tom Parker Bowles planned to transform them into a state-of-the-art, farm-to-table culinary academy. This academy would cater to elite international clients, offering bespoke cooking masterclasses hosted by top-tier chefs, with a heavy emphasis on wild game, organic produce, and traditional British cooking techniques sourced directly from the surrounding royal acreage. Beyond the Culinary Academy, the business model relied heavily on creating a premium, estate-branded consumer line. Financial spreadsheets attached to the proposal outlined the development of an artisanal distillery that would produce high-end spirits and alcohol-free botanical cordials. The marketing strategy was built entirely around the concept of royal provenance, intending to utilize rare botanicals, ancient orchard fruits, and natural spring water harvested exclusively from the restricted grounds of the Gatcombe borderlands. By aligning the product line so closely with the private heritage of the monarchy, the venture aimed to capture a significant share of the booming global market for prestige organic goods, targeting luxury retailers in London, New York, and Dubai. The hospitality aspect of the project went even further, introducing a concept for low-impact, ultra-luxury accommodation. The blueprints detailed the placement of a dozen custom-built eco-glamping pods tucked into the ancient woodlands along the property's quietest boundaries. These pods were not intended for standard tourists. They were designed as completely secluded, five-star retreats featuring private wood-fired hot tubs, personal butler service, and direct access to the estate's private fishing lakes. Preliminary financial projections estimated that these accommodations could easily command rates starting at £4,000 per night, appealing to ultra-high net worth individuals seeking absolute privacy and an authentic connection to a historic estate. For Tom Parker Bowles and his investment partners, the venture was seen as a forward-thinking win for the modern monarchy. They argued that by generating independent multi-million-pound revenue streams through private land assets, the family could easily self-fund the massive maintenance costs of their historical buildings. This approach aligned perfectly with the broader economic philosophy often championed by King Charles, who has long advocated for a more streamlined, self-sustaining royal footprint that reduces any perceived financial burden on the public. The commercial team was confident that as long as the operations remained visually discreet and environmentally sustainable, the project would be welcomed as an innovative model for 21st century estate management. However, this entire commercial apparatus was built on a massive administrative assumption. Because King Charles had historically shown a willingness to modernize estate operations and support sustainable agricultural businesses, Tom Parker Bowles' team assumed that securing the necessary long-term leases would be a straightforward bureaucratic process. They spent months conducting soil tests, structural assessments of the barns, and market viability studies, all under the impression that the land would eventually be managed through the standard channels of the Duchy of Lancaster or general Crown property updates. The planning was so advanced that initial branding mock-ups had already been generated, featuring stylized corporate logos and promotional imagery superimposed over the estate's historic stone facades and rolling hills. The entire project ground to a sudden and unexpected halt when the existence of these commercial plans reached Princess Anne. As the primary custodian of her late mother's private files and personal covenants, Princess Anne has always operated with an entirely different set of priorities. Known throughout her life for her strict adherence to tradition, intense work ethic, and a firm aversion to the commercialization of the royal brand, she viewed the sovereign palate proposal with immediate and profound disapproval. To her, the idea of turning a private family sanctuary into a commercial playground for wealthy international tourists was an unacceptable violation of the quiet, non-transactional legacy that Queen Elizabeth II had spent 8 decades protecting. According to reports from administrative staff working within the Royal Estates Department, Princess Anne discovered the full extent of the commercial planning through a routine audit of regional land usage inquiries. When she reviewed the detailed business decks, financial projections, and corporate branding materials, her reaction was described by insiders as characteristically decisive. She did not initiate a lengthy family debate or request a compromise. Instead, she immediately moved to assert her ultimate veto power by activating the strict protective clauses embedded in the 2021 Sovereign Directive. By doing so, she effectively locked down the entire geography of the Gatcombe borderlands, removing it completely from the reach of any commercial leasing discussions. The interception of the business plan created immediate shockwaves through the commercial faction. For Tom Parker Bowles and his investment partners, the sudden intervention felt less like a standard administrative review and more like a deliberate, aggressive blocking maneuver. They found themselves in a position where 14 months of meticulous planning, legal consultations, and financial investing were rendered entirely useless by a single administrative signature. The frustration was compounded by the absolute finality of Princess Anne's decision. Because her authority was derived from a personal sovereign privilege granted directly by the late monarch, there was no committee to appeal to, no regulatory body to petition, and no room for negotiation. This administrative clash highlights a major quiet division within the extended royal family regarding the role of private wealth and public perception. The commercial side genuinely believed that a project like the Sovereign Palate represented the future of a modern, self-funding monarchy that engages creatively with the luxury economy. They felt that blocking such a thoroughly researched, sustainable initiative was an overly rigid approach that ignored practical financial realities. Conversely, Princess Anne's side maintained that the true strength of the monarchy lies in its distance from the corporate world. From her perspective, the moment private royal sanctuaries are chopped up into high-end hospitality venues and luxury spirit brands, the institution risks losing its dignity and transforming its sacred heritage into a mere marketing asset. As the realities of the legal lockdown became clear, the investment group began to unravel. Terrified of becoming entangled in a high-profile public relations conflict with Princess Anne, who consistently ranks as one of the most respected and hardworking members of the royal family, the primary financial backers quickly began to back away from the project. They recognized that without absolute security over the land leases, any further investment was an immense financial gamble. Within weeks of the sovereign veto being activated, the corporate entities that had been quietly registered to manage the hospitality and distillery operations were quietly mothballed. The collapse of the venture left an atmosphere of deep resentment that extended far beyond standard business disappointment. Sources close to the household noted that Tom Parker Bowles was deeply furious over the development, feeling that his professional reputation as a culinary entrepreneur had been completely disregarded by what his circle viewed as an outdated approach to estate management. The situation was made even more tense by the fact that Queen Camilla had subtly favored the idea of her son developing a prestigious, sustainable project on royal soil, believing it would showcase a positive, modern family collaboration. Instead, the swift and absolute execution of the late Queen's hidden mandate served as a cold reminder that when it comes to the core private assets of the monarchy, the traditional bloodline retains absolute, unyielding control. The escalation of this administrative dispute into a major family crisis reflects the deep institutional and personal shifts that have occurred within the royal household since the transition of the crown. Following the high-stakes meeting within the private committee rooms of St. James's Palace, the internal rift between the traditional bloodline and the newly integrated commercial interests became an undeniable reality for senior courtiers. The initial legal presentation delivered by Tom Parker Bowles' representatives had been designed to offer an elegant, modernized compromise, but it fundamentally misjudged the uncompromising nature of the woman holding the late Queen's personal mandate. Princess Anne's absolute refusal to entertain any commercial deviation from her mother's strict guidelines effectively turned a standard estate review into a profound, ideological standoff that resonated through every hallway of the palace. To understand the sheer scale of the frustration felt by Queen Camilla's son, one must look at the specific details of the compromise proposal that Princess Anne so decisively rejected. Tom Parker Bowles' legal team had spent weeks drafting a framework for a joint public-private entity temporarily named the Gatcombe Heritage Trust. Under this proposed structure, Princess Anne would have retained her titles as chief custodian and environmental overseer, ensuring that her public commitment to land conservation was respected. In return, the day-to-day operations, commercial licensing, and international marketing of the Culinary Academy and Botanical Distillery would be managed by an independent board of luxury hospitality professionals. The lawyers argued that this model would insulate the royal family from direct commercial scrutiny, while still unlocking the immense financial value of the estate's unused buildings. The legal advisors went as far as presenting international precedents, citing successful heritage preservation models used by various aristocratic families across continental Europe and Japan. They argued that in the modern economic climate, leaving vast historic structures like 16th century tithe barns entirely closed to the public and disconnected from local economies was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. From their perspective, the Sovereign Palate venture was an act of architectural and cultural resurrection, a way to breathe new life into decaying stone, while generating independent revenue that could be used to fund wider environmental initiatives across the Gloucestershire countryside. They framed the project not as a corporate takeover, but as a sophisticated evolution of traditional land stewardship. However, the presentation of these international models and economic justifications did absolutely nothing to alter Princess Anne's administrative position. According to those present in the room, she did not view the proposal as a progressive evolution, but as a highly calculated attempt to erode the private boundaries of the monarchy. When she produced the certified 2021 Sovereign Covenants from the Royal Archives, she did so with a finality that completely silenced the room's legal advisors. The handwritten notes from Queen Elizabeth II were explicitly clear. The private estates were never to be treated as commercial assets, and the privacy of these specific geographic sanctuaries was to be maintained at all costs. For Princess Anne, the moment a corporate board is given management rights over any portion of a private royal estate, the essential integrity of that land is compromised, regardless of how elegantly the commercial operation is packaged. This rigid defense of the late Queen's private wishes immediately brought Queen Camilla into the discussion. Recognizing that her son's professional reputation and significant financial investments were on the verge of being permanently erased, Camilla attempted to steer the conversation toward family unity and modern practicalities. She pointed out that the current monarch, King Charles, had spent his entire adult life championing organic agriculture, rural craftsmanship, and sustainable luxury through projects like the Highgrove Shop and the Duchy of Cornwall brands. Camilla argued that Tom's vision for a premium, estate-branded organic line was entirely complementary to the king's lifelong philosophy of making traditional British heritage self-sustaining and globally relevant. Princess Anne's icy rebuttal to Queen Camilla's argument highlighted the critical constitutional difference between public royal duchies and the monarch's private personal property. Anne firmly explained that the Duchy of Cornwall and the Duchy of Lancaster exist as public institutional trusts designed specifically to generate income to support the official duties and households of the working royals. Because they are institutional, they are subject to modern economic demands, public accountability, and government oversight. In sharp contrast, the private estates and personal inheritances of the monarch are entirely separate, serving as the family's ultimate refuge from public life and commercial pressures. Princess Anne made it absolutely clear that she would never allow the family's private personal sanctuaries to be merged with the modern luxury economy or used to elevate the commercial profiles of individuals outside the direct line of succession. As the meeting progressed, the tone shifted from structured legal arguments to a much more personal and heated exchange. Tom Parker Bowles reportedly expressed immense frustration at the absolute veto, pointing out that his team had acted with transparency, environmental sensitivity, and a genuine respect for the history of the land. His advisors argued that a complete refusal to modernize these closed assets could eventually lead to negative public scrutiny if the details of such massive, untaxed, and unused properties were ever leaked to the investigative press. They suggested that in a modern society, maintaining completely unmapped, off-the-books royal reserves while blocking sustainable local development projects could be perceived as an outdated and overly secretive abuse of historic privilege. This subtle invocation of potential media pressure and public scrutiny was perhaps the biggest strategic mistake the commercial team could have made. Throughout her decades as one of the hardest-working members of the royal family, Princess Anne has established an international reputation for completely ignoring public relations calculations, media trends, and journalistic commentary. She countered by stating that the royal family's private boundaries are completely sovereign and entirely immune to external media narratives or public relations threats. She warned that any attempt to use the threat of public disclosure or media leverage to force an administrative compromise on a private family estate would be viewed as a direct violation of family trust and institutional loyalty. With no room left for negotiation, the finality of Princess Anne's position effectively dismantled the legal and financial foundations of the Sovereign Palette project. The legal advisors recognized that without the security of long-term land leases from the ultimate custodian, The entire venture was legally non-viable and financially reckless. The meeting concluded with no agreement signed, no compromises reached, and an absolute confirmation that the Gatcombe borderlands would remain entirely closed to any outside commercial development. The finality of the decision left an immediate and profound sense of bitterness that quickly spread throughout the various households of the royal family. In the days immediately following the St. James's Palace confrontation, the domestic atmosphere within the royal residences was described by senior staff as an absolute deep freeze. Queen Camilla was reported to be deeply upset by the uncompromising and frosty manner in which her intervention had been dismissed by her sister-in-law. Meanwhile, Tom Parker Bowles was described by close associates as being in an absolute fury, feeling that his professional expertise as a respected culinary author and entrepreneur had been treated with total disregard by a rigid administrative structure. The standard informal communications that typically flow between the staff at Clarence House and the estate management offices at Gatcombe Park were temporarily reduced to the absolute minimum required for official state scheduling. Courtiers and household advisors found themselves navigating an incredibly tense environment, carefully managing the daily calendars of the senior royals to ensure that Princess Anne and Queen Camilla did not cross paths during private family meals or informal gatherings at Windsor or Sandringham. The standard warmth that had characterized family interactions during the later years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign was replaced by a sterile, highly professional distance. This internal freeze served as a stark reminder to everyone within the palace walls that the transition of power had opened up deep, underlying divisions regarding the true purpose and management of royal wealth in the 21st century. This boardroom clash ultimately exposed a fundamental and unresolved philosophical debate at the heart of the modern British monarchy. The commercial faction, supported by modern wealth managers, luxury brand consultants, and the extended family of Queen Camilla, genuinely believes that the long-term survival of the institution relies on its ability to creatively and sustainably monetize its historic footprint. They argue that in an era of increasing economic scrutiny, the family must demonstrate its utility by converting closed assets into engines of cultural and economic value. From their perspective, blocking high-end, environmentally friendly initiatives like the Culinary Academy is an overly conservative approach that fails to adapt to modern realities. On the other side of the divide stands Princess Anne, representing the traditionalist worldview of the late Queen. This faction firmly believes that the true power, mystique, and dignity of the British crown depend entirely on its distance from the corporate world and the commercial marketplace. For Princess Anne, the private estates are not financial portfolios to be maximized, but a sacred historical trust to be preserved exactly as they were received. By utilizing the 2021 Sovereign Directive to completely crush the luxury hospitality project, Anne sent an unmistakable message to the entire royal household. As long as she remains the executor of her mother's private wishes, the core sanctuaries of the monarchy will never be converted into commercial marketing assets, and the traditional bloodline will maintain an absolute, unyielding grip on the physical and moral heritage of the family. The immediate consequence of the St. James's Palace confrontation was the rapid and total unraveling of the commercial alliance that had been assembled to fund the sovereign palate. In the high-end boardrooms of London's financial district, where the initial rounds of venture capital had been quietly secured, the news of Princess Anne's absolute administrative veto changed the entire dynamic of the investment. The institutional backers and luxury hospitality groups that had pledged millions of pounds to the transformation of the Gatcombe borderlands were not ideological crusaders. They were practical businessmen who required absolute legal security before deploying their capital. The moment it became clear that the primary custodian of the estate had activated a personal sovereign directive that completely barred any commercial leasing or third-party corporate management, the legal foundation of the entire venture dissolved. According to financial analysts who monitor luxury land investments and heritage property portfolios in the United Kingdom, the primary investors pulled out of the project within 48 hours of the palace boardroom meeting. The investors recognized that entering into a prolonged legal or public relations battle with Princess Anne was an immense commercial risk with no upside. Princess Anne consistently ranks as one of the most widely respected and dependable members of the royal family, Praised by both the public and the media for her work ethic and no-nonsense approach to her duties. Any commercial entity seen as trying to force its way onto her private estate, against the explicit handwritten wishes of the late Queen Elizabeth II, would face an immediate and devastating public backlash. Terrified of a corporate public relations disaster that could permanently damage their primary luxury brands, the venture capital firms withdrew their funding offers, leaving the project entirely hollowed out. With the financial backing completely gone, the corporate entities that Tom Parker Bowles and his advisors had quietly registered to oversee the hospitality, culinary academy, and botanical distillery operations had to be completely dismantled. Corporate registry filings from the early months of 2026 show that the companies associated with the Sovereign Palate project were formally dissolved and removed from the official books. This rapid corporate collapse represented a massive personal and professional setback for Tom Parker Bowles, who had spent over a year treating the Gloucestershire Reserve as the definitive centerpiece of his future business portfolio. The sudden and public end of the venture forced him to quietly withdraw from several high-profile culinary events and public panel discussions, with close associates indicating to the press that his absence was due to extreme stress-related fatigue stemming from the sudden collapse of his long-term professional plans. While the commercial faction was dealing with the immediate fallout of their failed venture, Princess Anne moved swiftly to ensure that the Gatcombe borderlands could never be targeted by future commercial schemes or generational reallocations. Understanding that administrative vetoes can occasionally be challenged or eroded over long periods of time through subtle bureaucratic pressure, she decided to implement a permanent legal lockdown of the geography. Utilizing her absolute authority as the sole executor of her mother's private files, she oversaw the formal transfer of the entire Gloucestershire Reserve into a newly structured, heavily restricted, private conservation trust. This trust was explicitly designed to bypass standard royal estate management committees and was placed under the direct long-term administration of her own children, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall. The structural details of this new conservation trust reflect the ultimate victory of the traditionalist faction within the palace. The trust deeds dictate that the land must be maintained strictly as a working agricultural reserve, wildlife sanctuary, and local environmental research zone. Any form of premium hospitality, corporate branding, commercial manufacturing, or third-party leasing is permanently and unconditionally prohibited within its borders. By placing her children at the head of the trust, Princess Anne ensured that the management of the land would remain firmly within her immediate branch of the family for the next generation, completely insulating the territory from any future shifting priorities or modernization initiatives that might be favored by other branches of the extended royal family. Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall have both spent decades living and working in Gloucestershire, maintaining a deep personal connection to the land and a well-known commitment to traditional rural conservation, making them the ideal stewards to enforce the late Queen's original vision. The permanent closure of the estate and the transfer of its stewardship to Princess Anne's children served as the final, definitive rebuff to the ambitions of Queen Camilla's side of the family. According to reports from courtiers close to the household at Clarence House, the finality of the legal transfer left an atmosphere of deep and lingering resentment. For Queen Camilla, who had subtly supported the idea of her son developing a prestigious, sustainable enterprise on royal soil, the swift and absolute execution of the late Queen's hidden mandate was a deeply painful realization of her administrative limits. It demonstrated that despite her high position as Queen Consort, when it comes to the core private wealth, personal inheritances, and historical sanctuaries of the traditional bloodline, her family remains entirely on the outside, unable to influence or access the private memory of the monarchy. This reality became even more apparent when looking at the broader historical context of Princess Anne's administrative maneuver. Royal historians and constitutional experts have noted that the activation of the 2021 Sovereign Directive represents the most significant assertion of personal sovereign privilege regarding private property since the era of Queen Victoria. For decades, the public has been led to believe that the royal family's private assets were slowly being integrated into a more transparent, modern corporate structure. The revelation of these secret codicils, unmapped borders, and absolute personal vetoes proves that the monarchy has maintained a highly sophisticated, parallel legal fortress designed specifically to protect its traditional identity from the demands of the modern world. Princess Anne's actions have shown that the family is entirely willing to deploy this immense legal power to protect its sanctuaries, even if it means causing severe internal conflict and completely alienating close family members. As the weeks passed following the formal registration of the new conservation trust, the public presentation of the royal family remained entirely separate from the quiet tension behind the scenes. In line with the family's long-standing policy of maintaining absolute discretion, no formal public statements or press releases were issued regarding the cancellation of the Sovereign Palette project or the reallocation of the Gloucestershire Reserve. To the outside observer, the daily business of the monarchy continued without interruption, with Princess Anne carrying out her extensive schedule of public engagements with her characteristic efficiency and focus. However, inside the palace walls, the balance of power had experienced a fundamental shift, with staff describing the current environment as highly professional but noticeably distant, characterized by a careful adherence to formal boundaries and schedules. The defining visual counterpoint to this entire administrative drama occurred in late winter, when Princess Anne, accompanied by Peter Phillips, Zara Tyndall, and her grandchildren, made a quiet, unannounced visit to the historic tithe barns that had been the primary target of Tom Parker Bowles's commercial ambitions. There were no cameras, no media coordinators, and no public announcements. A single local observer noted that the family spent the afternoon walking through the ancient orchards and reviewing local forestry management plans with the estate's traditional gamekeepers. The image of the family standing on the frozen Gloucestershire soil, completely disconnected from the luxury economy or global branding initiatives, served as the ultimate confirmation of Princess Anne's victory. It was a silent, powerful demonstration that the land had been successfully returned to its original purpose as a private family sanctuary, entirely free from the pressures of profit or public relations. Ultimately, the resolution of the conflict over the Gatcombe borderlands provides a profound insight into the true nature of royal power and the preservation of history in the 21st century. The commercial faction, led by modern entrepreneurs and wealth managers, had argued that the survival of the institution depended on its ability to evolve, to creatively engage with the global luxury market, and to transform its aging historic structures into self-funding corporate assets. They viewed their sustainable, high-end culinary proposal as a progressive step forward that respected the environment while embracing modern financial realities. They genuinely believed that leaving hundreds of acres of prime historic land completely closed to the world was an unsustainable approach that failed to adapt to the expectations of a modern society. Princess Anne's total victory proved that the traditionalist philosophy remains the dominant force within the core structures of the British crown. Her actions, rooted in the private instructions left by Queen Elizabeth II, demonstrated a firm belief that the true strength, mystery, and longevity of the monarchy depend entirely on its distance from the corporate marketplace. From this perspective, the moments of greatest danger for the institution do not come from a lack of revenue, but from the erosion of its dignity through commercial transactions. By completely crushing the luxury hospitality project and locking down the estate under a strict conservation trust, Princess Anne ensured that the private sanctuaries of the monarchy would remain entirely non-negotiable, preserving a space where history, memory, and tradition can exist without a price tag. The quiet struggle over the Gloucestershire Reserve may have concluded with a definitive administrative victory for Princess Anne, but the structural and philosophical divisions it exposed will continue to shape the internal dynamics of the royal household for years to come. As the family navigates the complex realities of a new reign, the tension between the push for modern commercial sustainability and the fierce defense of traditional non-transactional heritage will remain a constant undercurrent behind the palace walls. For now, however, the message from the ultimate gatekeeper of the late Queen's private legacy is unmistakably clear. Those who seek to convert the private sanctuaries of the crown into luxury marketing assets will find themselves completely outmaneuvered by a legal fortress built on patience, tradition, and an unyielding commitment to the silent foundations of the monarchy.